I always get, thank you so much, Philip, and I'm always, whenever somebody says Dr. Weinberg, I'm like, look around the room. I never think of myself. I'm always afraid like somebody's going to ask me to save them or something medically, and I'm just I don't know. I somehow, being a PhD, I never really feel like I'm a doctor. Anyway, I want to thank Philip, and I'm so pleased to be on this panel, and I'm going to be talking about, I'm both an artist and an art historian, and so I'm going to try to talk a little bit about my own work and some of the anxieties I think that I share, possibly shared with Colleen Browning, and certainly some of the issues that I think have come up in terms of painting and photography. Oh, I just did something wrong there. Ah, yes, okay. I want to talk today about the specific high anxieties, or what I call photographic guilt, that hangs over the use of the camera by realist painters of the 20th century, like Browning. The issue is central to the exhibition I curated with Barbara Buehler Lyons for the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in 2011, entitled Shared Intelligence, American Painting and the Photograph, and this is the catalog from that. My collaborator, Barbara, who was at the time the chief curator at the O'Keeffe Museum, got involved in the subject. And these are two works from the show, one of them an Audrey Flack, Charles Sheeler. But she got involved with the show because Georgia O'Keeffe, through her husband, dealer Alfred Stieglitz, was deeply involved in the practice and exhibition of photographs. And of course, Stieglitz was one of the great photographers of the 20th century. But Barbara was also drawn to the subject because she knew that O'Keeffe, who herself rarely painted from photographs, was actually accused by the modernist critic Clement Greenberg of producing paintings that were little more than tinted photography. That's what he said. In certain avant-garde circles in the 40s and 50s, nothing was considered more terrible than this idea that a painter was merely copying a photographic image. That is something that a commercial artist like Norman Rockwell, and here you see with some works that he would base his images from photographs, did. That was something that you could if you were an illustrator, but not a great artist like Jackson Pollock. But why exactly is painting from a photograph so terrible? Why is there such anxiety about the practice, not just from artists and critics who are against using photographs, but also, interestingly, from artists who use photographs in the creation of their work? And here, by the way, is a kind of guide that you can still get on Amazon about how to make pictures from photographs. And it's the type of thing that most art teachers and art schools would be horrified if they knew their students were using. The subject is particularly apt because of this show and because of Browning, since we already heard actually Browning saying, and she talks about in her book, Working Out a Painting, how she used photographs. And she said, I am terribly self-conscious about sketching in public. I can't think about what I'm doing if I become a public entertainment. But one's relatively anonymous behind a camera, which I find invaluable for taking notes. The camera gives me quick, accurate information that I can use if necessary at a later date. Later in my studio, I lay them all out, relive the scene, examine them with a magnifying glass for details, and so gradually come to know what I am trying to say in the painting and how to paint it. Interestingly, this discussion of the camera is illustrated not with photographs, but with a highly illusionistic painting, as you can see here, The Ghost Woman of Assyria, I guess I pronounced that, from '83. Although the implication is that Browning used photographs as source materials, she does not illustrate them. Actually, she only reproduces what she calls reference photographs in the book, in relationship to the 1987 painting Fiesta, perhaps because, I guess, in this case it's very easy to see that although she took certain characters from photographs, she did not slavishly imitate any single image. However, the very pedagogical method, that Browning's entire book uses is dependent on photography, because the book goes through the stages of making paintings. And I find it fascinating that she actually must have created certain paintings and known that she was going to do the book and took multiple photographs to illustrate how to work out a painting. And I'm just briefly showing you that two works in which I use photographs. And And as I say, the reason I find Browning's use of photography and her seeming ambivalence about it by showing so few reference photographs in her guide so fascinating is because I, too, am a user of photographs. And I chose the word user carefully because I wanted to reverberate with the language of addiction, since almost from its invention. And here I'm just showing you another work that's a pastiche. It's called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and it's a pastiche of the famous Iwo Jima monument, which itself is based on photographs, right? So in the history of modern art, it turns out that lots and lots of artists have used photographs, and lots of critics have been, from the very invention of photography, very critical and worried about it. People like Ruskin and Delacroix. Ruskin were very critical of it and warned about it, and Delacroix warned about it. But it turns out great artists like Manet and even Cézanne made paintings from photographs. Now, when art historians like myself tell you this, the implication is that if such a hero of modernism as Cézanne based paintings on photographs, the practice can't be all bad. Indeed, such knowledge might undermine a recent critic's claim about the necessary difference between painting from life and painting from a photograph. Now, so Richard Colleen, who's a really good critic, compares a Bechtel and an Edward Fischl, and he says, painting a photograph of a scene is entirely different from painting the scene itself. A scene is alive and engaging, whereas a photograph is static and resistant. To paint from a snapshot is the antithesis of Cézanne's method, the complex, Rader-like locating of an object both in the real world and on the picture pane. The result, for better or worse, he says, is a distanced, denatured representation, one that tends towards the stilted. Now, I imagine that he didn't know at the time that Cézanne used photographs, including several for his self-portraits, and he probably just didn't know that. So anyway, it's ironic. Now, such comparisons are based on a larger claim about the absolute difference between the two mediums. So, for example, the painter, and I should add photographer, David Hockney insists, you can't look at most photographs for more than, say, 30 seconds. Life is precisely what they don't have. Photography is all right if you don't mind looking at the world from the point of view of a paralyzed cyclops for a split second. The reason you can't look at a photograph for a long time is because there's virtually no time in it. So that's Hockney. Now, surely Hockney is being purposely contentious here. He's well aware that the power of photography is often tied to its seeming ability to capture fleeting sensations, to, in essence, freeze time. But for Hockney, this is exactly what is wrong with photography. He claims painting is more adept at capturing memories, in part because it takes time to make a painted picture. Paintings not only embody the physical movement of the hand and the multiple glances of vision, they give form to lived experience, the actual experience of the painter and the subject, or the experience the artist brings to his canvas. Of course, though, like so many generalizations about these two mediums, you can say almost precisely the opposite. Now, some snapshots are taken virtually instantaneously, and given knowledge of camera and films, we can determine with precision the exact millisecond it took to capture an image. Other photographs take enormous amount of effort and time to produce. While it's true, and this is the opposite side of this, while it's true that a painting may require time for it to be completed, it's terribly imprecise about communicating this. Did a painting take several hours, days, months? Did the artist work on a picture for a month, then come back later, even years later? These questions may sound trivial, but I will guarantee you, and every artist in the room knows it's true, that the number one question that I get is, how long did it take you to make a painting? That's always the question that people ask artists. Now, my point here is not to argue with Hockney or Colleen and say there isn't a difference between painting from a photograph or real life. But what I'm concerned about is why is there their sense that there's such certainty when they talk about this complex and confusing phenomenon. Such certainty, I think, is based on the desire to contain the enormous disruptive power of photography in all its ubiquity and myriad forms, and to simplify the confusing process by which we perceive and make sense of the world. No matter how we experience reality, we always do so through representations, including photography. Even if we think of the photograph as static and flat, flat, our perception of a photograph. The ability of our eyes and bodies to move in relationship to an image is not static. That is not to say that there is no difference between painting and photography as practice as a medium, nor is it to say that painting directly from an object and painting from a photograph of the same object is equivalent. Only those differences are not easy to understand, and more importantly, the results are not predictable. Given Hockney's sometimes disparaging remarks about photography, it's odd that the picture on the catalog for his first major retrospective at Whitechapel Art Gallery is not a painting, but a photograph of Hockney taken by his lover at the time, Peter Schlesinger. And in the background, it actually says, "Why photo?" It's a pun, right? Why photo when you can make paintings, perhaps, is the point. Now, Schlesinger was particularly attuned to Hockney's use of photographs as the means of making pictures. So Hockney uses photographs all the time, and it was a painting of Peter, and I actually think it's his best painting, single painting by Hockney called Portrait of the Artist, in which Hockney traces a photograph to make this painting, and he does it in a really strange and entertaining and sexy documentary about his life called A Bigger Splash. It's kind of a fictional film, but he actually plays himself. Some people know that Joan Rivers did the same thing a few years later, so she was influenced by Hockney, where Joan Rivers plays her life story. Anyway, I'm going to skip quickly, but this is the film. And here, in the film, he actually shows this image. He's having trouble finishing the painting, and he's able to finish it because he's able to trace the picture. And I think it's almost scandalous. It has a kind of scandalous flavor about it. I'm going to just skip ahead here a little bit to do quickly. But here's another example of how Hockney used photographs to do this incredible painting of Christopher Isherwood and Don Biccardi, a portrait of their incredible relationship. Now, Hockney acknowledges this. He's not hiding it. But he says this: "I never use photographs the way photorealists use them, projecting a color slide on the canvas and painting from that. I think I draw well enough to have no need for that." The implication is that only a poor draftsman would do such a thing. Not, of course. Now, of course, the film A Bigger Splash doesn't show you Hockney exactly using a slide to make a complete painting from it, but he does trace in that. And it's funny, and some of you may know this, that Hockney has written an entire book and made a movie about how all these great artists in the past have used various forms of lenses and in photography, sort of the precursors of photography to make paintings. And yet, in that book, Hockney himself says almost nothing about how he uses photography. And I think it's an attempt to sort of justify his use by saying, look at all these great artists who do it, without actually saying that. Now I'm going to show you another artist, Robert Bechtel, who's a good friend and I think a wonderful painter. And he talks about the first time that he used a slide, right, to make this painting on the left, and this is the slide on the right. And I thought at the time that the reason he did that was to make almost like a pop art image, a replication. But he said the reason he did it is he was trying really hard to get the car right in the painting. And he said that when he did it in this sort of moment of desperation, and he did it and he thought it looked great. But he said, I felt very guilty. And so I've been ever since he said that, I've been so fascinated, why guilty? Why did he feel, as he said at the time, that he felt like he was cheating? And the reason he said was, again, it was so associating with illustration, with bad artists use photographs. A lot of all this came to the fore again with a big Thomas Aitken's retrospective several years ago, in which everybody was shocked to find out that this amazing painting, Mending of the Net from 1881, was traced, that Aitken's too used photographs and literally traced certain of the figures onto the painting. And the curators were so nervous that people would think that Aitken's wasn't a good artist that they say things like this: Aitken's use of photograph in making his painting was a deeply thoughtful undertaking driven by serious work. They wanted to make sure that we realized that it was hard to do this. And that same theme comes up again and again in the discourse around photorealism, that it really is hard work to do this, and it's not easy to copy a slide. But of course, whether or not it's hard to do something or not doesn't make a good painting or not. That's almost beside the point. And I find that so interesting, this fear that people are going to think that Gran Torino painting on the left, which is a fantastic painting, is not a good painting because somehow it's just a copy. Now, the great paradox about all this, the great difficulty, is that the only way that I can convince you, if you're not convinced that Gran Torino is a great painting, is to have you see it in the flesh. Every image that I've shown you, every image that we've seen on the screen here, and very badly reproduced, is some kind of a photograph. All these paintings have been scanned. So we're seeing everything through photography as even we give you this lecture. And that's, again, the problem, because photographs return Bechtel's paintings and photorealist paintings, reproductions of them, turn them back into photographs, and you can't see how beautifully, meticulously painted and how full of light and how different they actually look from photographs. And that's one of the difficulties. But again, it's Hockney who said the best thing he could say about photographs is how useful they are for teaching the history of art and making reproductions. Anyway, I'm going to leave you here with no modesty, but Philip told me that I should do this and just show you some of my work, not necessarily saying which ones I did from, well, I will. A self-portrait like this I did from just looking at myself in a mirror, right? But I do lots of paintings of models and nude models, and they don't like to be photographed because they're afraid that their life and career will be destroyed if they are photographed. They don't like using their name either, or some of them do. Some love being photographed, but that's a whole other story. But when I do these kinds of portraits, many of which are of art historians, like Linda Nochlin, these people are busy and they don't have a lot of time, and so I always have them sit and paint them for a few hours so that they get relaxed, and then I take a photograph. And depending how it goes, I use the photograph to finish the painting. Sometimes if it goes so quickly, I don't. So it's a tool for me. Here, in fact, on our panel is Henry Adams, who I painted really quickly, actually. He said he loved the way it looked at the time, but I said I needed to fix it and change it. And as I remember, his wife had many different problems with it. And so we went through a process, and if I didn't have the photograph, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Again, I often am painting people like that. Believe it or not, these are surfers in San Diego, and they shower in public. This is a shower outside, and so one's able to photograph them, and I make a lot of paintings doing that. This is the artist, illustrator Maurice Sendak, who was an old friend, and he hated modeling. He said he would pose, and then either he'd fall asleep or he had to work on something else. And this, I was able to, paint him while he was drawing. But again, I used photography, and he objected to looking so fat in the painting, so I thinned him down, I think, but probably not sufficiently. And then I did a painting, I love this work, of a dentist, a really great dentist in New York who I very much admired. This is his son and his wife, by the way. They're operating, and I began with sketching them and then finished it. And at the time, I was working on photorealism, so I actually projected the image onto the screen to see how difficult it is. And it is hard. And it doesn't, and different artists will come out with different results. Here it is, finished, the painting left finished. And you can see how different I think it is from the photograph. Finally there. And here, to end here, is a painting that I did of Philip and his wife, Yael. Is a wonderful woman, and it was a somewhat anxious process, but we got through it, and they're very happy with the work. And actually, it was one of my, I really was a fantastic experience to paint them, and they're an incredibly beautiful home. And you can see that I begin sort of photoshopping the picture. I wanted to get Philip's great book on Paul Cadenus into the picture, and it wasn't in the right place. And the bottles, there was a bottle that was in the wrong place, and I moved it, and I did all this stuff to change it, and then worked it up through that. So and then I also started by painting them in their house. So it was an interesting process. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.